All right, Ashley, what is your topic?
Rehabilitation and private prisons.
All right, audience, are you ready?
Yep.
Yes.
Always.
Ashley, are you ready?
I believe so.
And proceed.
During the First Great Depression, the citizens of Louisiana were hit hard financially. The state decided that they needed to privatize their penitentiaries in order to make a profit off of the criminals. A private prison basically is granted funds from private corporations or even the federal government to fund their prisons based on their population. A private prison should not be granted these funds based on population, but rather their ability to rehabilitate these inmates. The 3 points I want to discuss are the cost between public and private housing of prisoners, the profits and revenue made off these prisoners, and then gender rehabilitation. So a private prison basically sells their services to a government based off of the whole business model of we're going to save money. These public prisons are not saving you money. So they sell these services to the government that way, but sometimes that's not always kept. Now looking at cost, it costs about $55 a day to house a prisoner in a public facility. This averages out to be about 20 grand a year for that specific prisoner. Now looking at a public facility or private facility, it's about $45 a day, which is about $10 cheaper than the public, which averages about to be about 16 grand annually. But what is gained from these prisoners? What is a private prison gaining off of housing these prisoners in their private facility? According to a research paper authored by Peter Wagner and Bernadette Rubai on January 25th of 2017, CoreCivic received about $900 million in federal money in the year of 2015. This means they gained about a 51% profit over housing prisoners in their private facility. Based on the records of MTC or Management and Corporation in their 2015 report, the per person revenue for the years of 2005 and 2006 was about 15 grand. They had an estimated correctional revenue of about $400 million. And in total, the study basically concluded that they made about a $13.4 million profit in housing prisoners alone. Now, a private prison does not put this money back into the people. Yes, they pay out money for food and the basic necessities, but they don't have programs like the Unicorn, which I will discuss later on in my solutions. Looking at gender, how does women and males differ from public and private prisons? According to the study by the U.S. Department of Justice, last updated in December of 2021, in general, 50% of incarcerated people return to prison within 3 years of being released. In another study, according to the Farby and Knight study of 2002, women released from private facilities had lower rates of reoffending and being reincarcerated than adult females in the public prisons. About 34% of women who are released from these private facilities do return to prison. However, if you look at public prisons, 35% actually return to prison. This is actually a negative for public and a positive for private. So if they presented this to the federal government, it would be a much better business model than locking more people up. Focusing more on the males, a study conducted by Larsa Kudens et al. In 1999 followed about 198 males over a 12-month period. This study that was conducted basically found that there was no difference between the men in public and private, but they did find when they looked at the smaller nonviolent crimes that men typically return to public prisons versus the private prisons. Now, some solutions. According to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, last updated February 25th of 2022, the Unicorn have been proven to significantly lower recidivism rates in inmates. They basically lowered this by 24%. And the only downside to the Unicorn is, yes, it is only a public prison system, and it essentially helps send prisoners to the outside world after being released in more job force. They kind of enforce more workforce heavy, and it's not based on the business model of the whole private prison corporations. Another one would be judges. Judges have more leeway in these nonviolent crimes like fraud or even like nonviolent drug cases. According to a quote by Greg Margellanato, professor at WSU School of Economic Sciences, published September 15th of 2020 in the WSU Insider. For crimes like property damage, fraud, or nonviolent drug crimes, crimes where judges had more leeway in sentencing, states saw higher sentencing rates and significant increases in sentence lengths when private prisons were established. So basically, one example of this that's more modern was the Kids for Cash scandal, where a judge had a friend who owned a private detention center, and he would typically send the juvenile delinquents to this private facility in hopes that they would get more money from housing these delinquents, and he also was bribed and made money off of this. According to the ITPI and the Public Interest Research Brief published in June 2016, academic research has found that incarcerating people in prisons operated by public companies or private companies which have business models dependent on incarceration typically increases the likelihood of those people recidivating. To conclude my speech, it is made clear that the business model of a private prison is locking more people up behind bars to gain more profit. They tend to cut corners with staffing. The training is often shortened versus a public prison, which means they can house or they can give smaller wages to these private officers. And also they don't need to put money into these programs like the uniform. So all in all, a private prison should not be granted money based on their population, but rather recidivating and rehabilitating people. Yeah. I felt my heart racing and my knees shaking. It's still beating.
We can see either.
Really? Well, you can't see my heart like.
Well, obviously, that's
running.
my point. Play it off legit.
Did I get all my sources? I think.
I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, I had 5, so.
Okay, so I had, yeah. It should have been.
I found out I'm not the best at kitchen now.
I had 8 on here, but I think it was.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh boy.